second here. All right. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today's Friday and we have John talking about self-improvement. And today the theme is persistence. Take it away, John.
Lovely. Thank you. So, yeah, I think this is a very important topic. We're going to use a short story by Hemingway to substantiate this and kind of contrast from. If you have not read this book, it's totally fine. We're going to go through a brief summary, and then we're going to go into the nature of persistence, some implications of it, and then finally, the most important part is how to apply it, how to implement persistence in our daily routine toward our goals. So, Ernest Hemingway, it's a short story. It's called The Old Man and the Sea. It's literally about an old man and the sea, of course. And this old man, he's portrayed as despondent, down on his luck. He's gone, I think it's 87 days without catching anything in the sea. So he's out there repeatedly just beating at his craft with no success, with no fruition, right? He plays with the idea of quitting, of doubting himself, of worrying. But nonetheless, he still persists. He still pushes himself out on his little boat, and he goes out into the ocean, even though people, encourage him to stop. So he's out in this ocean, and I would say he is following the narrative of, there's a favorite quote I have of Thoreau, where he says, if you advance confidently in the direction of your dreams and aim to live the life that you've imagined, you will meet with unexpected success in common hours. So that unexpected success, like a surprise success in common hours in a daily routine, is exactly what happened to this old man. So after 87 days of no success, he hooks a fish, and he thinks it's very large because it's pulling he has a small, like, I don't know what type of boat it is, but it's portrayed almost as like a canoe on the cover. So it's very small, and this fish is actually pulling his boat. So he can judge from that strength of the line that it must be a very large fish, or at least very powerful. So he's in I think it's like a 3-day long battle with this fish. He's just holding the line, and he doesn't really have this advanced technology or anything. It's just like an old fashioned like fishing pole. So he has to actually hold the line himself, sleep standing up for like 2 or 3 days. And during this time, he kind of second guesses himself. He's saying, one, I'm very old. I don't know if I have the strength for this anymore. I don't even know if I should have been a fisherman. Like, this is it's dangerous. It's tiresome. It's time consuming. I don't know if I have it in me anymore. I've gone so long without success. I'm very discouraged. I don't even know if I should push on anymore. Maybe I should just let this fish go. But nonetheless, again, he persists regardless, even though his hands are bleeding and they're calloused from holding this fishing line and getting pulled back and forth from this fish. Eventually, I think it's like the third afternoon or something, the fish surfaces. And it's one of the biggest fish that he's ever seen. It's actually larger than his boat, he recounts. And he estimates it at about, I think he said like 1,500 pounds or something like that. So he's very, surprised by this. He's very shocked. And he doesn't really know what to do, because you obviously can't lift that size of a fish up in your little canoe. First, it would sink. But second of all, how are you physically going to lift that into your boat? So what he has to do is, as it surfaces, what is that thing called? A harpoon. He shoots it with a harpoon. He kills the fish, and he's like, okay, cool. The struggle's over. I've attained my goal. I've attained my purpose. I've proved myself worthy of being a fisherman. All the people back in the village are going to be proud. But more importantly, I'm proud of myself for kind of ending my dry streak. I'm proud of myself for proving to myself that I still had it in me to be a fisherman. So he's dragging this fish along, but obviously when you harpoon it, there's blood. And when there's blood in the ocean, what happens naturally as a consequence is sharks. So the latter half of the story, the second half of the story, recounts him battling off, I think it's like 6 or 7 sharks in succession, trying to, attack and steal the fish to eat it. And he ends up like kind of shooing some away. He has like a handheld knife. He has a club. He ends up losing these weapons in the battle with some of the sharks that he ends up killing, surprisingly, miraculously. And eventually, he has really nothing else to do, because these sharks are going to eat the fish regardless, and he's pretty far from shore. So by the time he actually gets back to his shore, to his little village on his little boat, the entire fish has been devoured, the entire fish. And he planned to sell this fish by the pound for meat. So obviously he's extremely discouraged, because he looked at this fish as a fortune. And more so, it's obviously more I guess, admirable in its prime state than it would be in a skeleton. So he arrives at the shore and he's just so despondent, so beaten, so broken down. He just walks up the hill into his, little cottage and just passes out from exhaustion and wakes up, and kind of has a little crowd gathering around his boat, because they do end up measuring the skeleton, and they do have proof and validity of his capture being noteworthy of recognition. So they're like, okay, wow, this skeleton is at least, 12, 15 feet long. This must have been a huge fish. Unfortunately, it got eaten by sharks, but nonetheless, it took a skilled fisherman to do this. So he still got some sense of recognition in the end, whether it was externally from the people measuring the skeleton, or at least, I would argue more importantly, internally from himself, for proving to himself that he is an avid fisherman. So that is the entire story in a nutshell. And we are going to dive into the implication now in terms of persistence. And at first, I want to read some quotes from the story that the old man actually utters himself when he is on this journey solo. He says, "Fish," this is after he hooks the fish, of course. He says, "Fish, I will stay with you until I am dead," right? The classic stubborn old man psychology. I love it. He says, "I wish I could feed this fish. He is my brother. If this fish stays down forever, I will stay down forever." A few more. He says, "There are three things that are brothers: the fish and my two hands." The final two are my favorite. He says, keep your head clear and know how to suffer like a man or like a fish." And the last one I think is the most important. It's the one I included in the meetup description, is that a man can be destroyed but not defeated. So we have to look at the distinction between both of these words. Destruction, that is going to, I guess, point to the inevitable, the ineluctable consequences, the inevitable opposition that we are going to come across in any goal, in any journey toward anything worth having. We are going to come across opposition, whether that's internal or whether that's external from other people, whether it's rejection from the outside world, whether it's our own inadequacies, whether it's incompetence, whether it's the past consequences of our neglect, of our choices of neglect, kind of coming to fruition, and us getting acquainted with those past choices. Whatever these obstacles are, they are inevitable in every single journey. So that would lead to decay. That would lead to, as this quote says, a man can be destroyed. You can be destroyed from these obstacles, sure. But defeat, you cannot be defeated with the correct attitude. I think defeat is inherently a choice. And you can kind of coalesce defeat with loss. And when it is a choice, I would say it's not an option if you have an ideal, okay? So if you have an ideal, if you have a goal, if you have a clear, definitive picture on which you are aiming, your North Star, everything that you would call a loss traditionally is not a loss. It is an investment into that. It is a necessary step to that. And I think a quote that perfectly encapsulates this attitude very well is from Ben Franklin. I brought this up in the past, but it's very beautiful and pertinent and applicable here, so I will share it again, where Ben Franklin was trying to discover the methodology to harness a light bulb, harness the power of electricity in a light bulb. And he says, "I didn't fail 10,000 times. I simply found 10,000 ways that didn't work," right? That's at the bare minimum. So I would say, even if you don't get I'm under the impression, under the philosophy that with every single defeat, every single opposition, there is a seed of equivalent advantage. If you look hard enough and you look long enough, it might not be immediately relevant to you. It might not be obvious. It might not be poking out at the surface from you. You might have to look a little bit. You might have to analyze the situation. You might have to detach yourself from your emotional snap judgments from the situation to be able to find this seed of equivalent advantage in the situation. Or you might have to ruminate and speculate on it long enough for you to find this seed. That might have to come with the passing of time, of course, as well. Or both. You might have to look deeply for an extended duration of time to find the seed of equivalent advantage. So that's the most you would get out of something, is a seed. And we implicitly understand this when we make up cliches like, when one door closes and another one opens. That's a very popular cliche, and that's exactly what this principle is right here. For every single defeat, there is a seed of equivalent advantage if you look hard enough with the right attitude. And if you're not going to find this seed, at the very least, you are going to imbue the philosophy of Ben Franklin. You are going to at least find a way that didn't work. You've mapped some speck of reality, some small, I guess, iota of the reality that you exist in, and you know where that choice, where that pathway is going to lead down the road. So you can say, I don't want to go there again because I know where that ends up. I know where that leads. So that is you acquiring knowledge. You are becoming more intelligent. You are becoming more informed and knowledgeable and enlightened with every single opposition, with every single failure. So that's, I guess, all of the implication behind that one statement. A man can be destroyed but not defeated. I would say loss, defeat, and failure would be a choice, but being, destroyed, coming against obstacles, that's inevitable. It's your attitude towards those obstacles is what makes it an investment or a loss. If you have an ideal, if you have something to justify all the suffering, all the mishaps towards, then everything becomes a necessary investment into that ideal. So that is the meaning behind the quote. In my eyes, a man can be destroyed but not defeated. And then secondly, I was actually reading most of this book on a hike. And the simple, it's kind of a simplistic analysis, but the reality hit me in that moment that while I was on this hike, I guess grasped a universal law of nature that all ontology, all biological life, all plants, all organisms, even our physical vessels, don't know how to quit. They are so imbued with persistence, they don't understand the concept of quitting. So given adequate resources, a tree, a flower, a plant, even our body, any animal is going to fulfill and strive its maximum potentialities and capabilities, right? The only variable that makes us different from every other biological organism is the mental realm, our conceptual realm of imagination. We can choose to stick with one thing, or we can choose to be haphazard and aimless. And again, so nature doesn't implicitly understand how to quit. Given it has adequate sunlight, adequate soil, adequate water, it is going to bloom to its fullest possible fruition. And this sounds kind of, I would say, comical, but you've never seen a plant, you've never seen a flower or a tree grow halfway and just abandon this journey. You've never seen anything say, okay, I'm halfway done, but this is good enough. I already have fruit budding. I have flowers blossoming. I'm all set. That's good enough. Good enough is not a phrase in nature. It's literally the maximal, everything you can possibly become or decay. That's it. Those are the only two directions that nature knows. And I think it would be wise to inherently follow in suit of nature and, I guess, establish that ideal. So this is where the idea of, for example, if Plato's form would come in. So you can make the argument that the flower or the tree or the plant is trying to emulate a form. And in Plato's idea of the form is a perfect image of something, like the ideal version of something, in short. So and then we live in a reality that is not perfect. It's everything in reality is trying to express that form. You can make the argument biologically speaking. So we can do this mentally. Like, this is not implicit within us in our subconscious, I guess, paradigms, but we can create a form of ourselves. We can create an ideal version of ourselves. We can create the equivalent of what that flower is trying to emulate in the universe. And this would be I would say a pragmatic example could be our future selves. We can say, okay, what is the healthiest version of me look like in the world? What is the most financially independent and successful version of me look like in the world? What is the most enthusiastic, energetic, charismatic, and sociable and outgoing version of me look like in the world? And then what you do is you look at the amalgamation and the accumulation of all those idiosyncrasies and attributes, you write them on paper, and that becomes your North Star. That becomes your ideal. That becomes your version. That becomes your form. That becomes the version that you're trying to emulate through your daily actions. And then once you have that form, there would be no I guess, loss or defeat in Hemingway's words. So to further kind of explain this, I want to share a quote this is actually from Napoleon Hill. If anybody doesn't know who Napoleon Hill was, to a quick substantiation on why his words are important. He was actually a journalist in the early 20th century, journalist/reporter, and he interviewed a man called Andrew Carnegie, who was the richest man in the world at the time. And Carnegie proposed to him. He says, Hill, you're very studious, you're very industrious, you're very attentive, you pay attention well, you're very articulate. I'm going to propose to you that you should, interview the world's top most successful people and create a philosophy of personal achievement. So I'll supply the connections. I have plenty of friends in business and industry. I'll supply you with time for them to interview. And what I want you to do is, study just as you're studying in this interview right now, and write down the golden thread, write down the principles that all of these individuals share or don't share. So he did this. He interviewed 500 of the world's top successful people at the time, including like Henry Ford and a bunch of other names. And also as supplementary research, he interviewed 16,000 like everyday people to look at like differences, like if these people think differently from like the top successful people of the time, if there's something that, you know, the top people in their fields know that the majority of us don't, etc. So over, I would say 17,000 people, and he comes to these conclusions. So this is in the book called Think and Grow Rich. It's chapter 9, Persistence. And Napoleon Hill says, after his analysis of thousands of people, lack of persistence is one of the major causes of failure. Moreover, experience with thousands of people has proved that a lack of persistence is a weakness common to the majority of men. It is a weakness which may be overcome by effort. The ease with which lack of persistence may be conquered will depend entirely upon the intensity of one's desire. Now, briefly, I want to go into a, I guess, contrarian perspective. I do want to play devil's advocate for a second. It's actually one of the questions in the breakout groups, which we'll get to in a few minutes. But so you might be thinking in your head, okay, persistence, that's all good and well, but how do we know we're not persistent toward the wrong thing? Or how can we just be blindly stubborn and just like ignore all indicators that we should change course or pivot or abandon this project entirely, and we would be more suitable to go in a different direction? That holds perfect merit. There's perfect utility in that argument. Now, personally, my answer to this, which is we're going to discuss later in the breakout groups, is maybe you can look at indicators, and if you make the same mistake multiple times, then maybe that's an indicator that you have to change. So don't ignore indicators. Don't be so ego driven and I would say attached to the identity of this particular goal that you are unwilling to be flexible and be open-minded in this approach. And I don't think we should let one anomaly or a few anomalies derail us. So as I mentioned earlier in the quote from Hemingway with, I mean, will maybe be destroyed but not defeated, we are going to come across obstacles and attenuating and contributing forces. And to give up at any of those anomalous events, I would say that is a lack of persistence, and that is, I would say, unequivocally detrimental. So once we conquer that obstacle, if it manifests again, then maybe, okay, we can take an objective approach and say, it might serve perfect utility to pivot here. And I think another obstacle that is very common, at least I've noticed in my life, and people that I've observed, is the time it might take to acquire a goal. So the time, personally, I think that's irrelevant. And I honestly would look at that as kind of masking the indecision that a person has that they actually want to have that goal come to fruition. I can give you an anecdotal example. A few years ago, I was a personal trainer at a gym. One of the number one question I hated getting most, and I got it from most of my clients, was, okay, once they have their goal, I want to lose 10 pounds, I want to get a six-pack, whatever it was my most annoying question was the following: how long will this take? Okay, my answer is it doesn't matter. At the end of this time, you're going to have this goal or you're not going to have the goal. That the very utterance of that question, how long is this going to take, is kind of an indicator to me that that person hasn't made the decision to make that goal mandatory. Okay, so even if it took 10 years, okay, when realistically a lot of change can be made and facilitated in 10 months, for example, or even 10 weeks, arguably. Even if it took 10 years, let's say someone wants to get a six-pack, they want to get low body fat, they want to be healthy, all these things. Even if it took 10 years to do this, at the end of 10 years, you either have the result or you have the excuse. Okay, you can't enjoy both. You can always entertain one or the other, a result or an excuse. So even if 10 years passes, regardless, you're going to have the result or you're not. So I always try not to get derailed by the time. I don't really ask myself, how long is this going to take for me to get it? It doesn't matter. It's not important. As long as I want this more than anything else, the time part is irrelevant. So now we are going to move and migrate into the third point of this presentation, and that is application. What we can learn, how we can apply all this information from the Old Man and the Sea, how we can apply this stuff from Napoleon Hill. And back, I want to go back to this quote for a second and talk about this because it was actually imbued in the quote itself, the solution. So he says, lack of persistence is a weakness common to the majority of men. He looks at it as very detrimental. And he says it may be overcome by effort. So what is the effort? He says the ease with which lack of persistence may be overcome will depend entirely upon the intensity of one's desire. So we can look at that in a practical concept. So when I was talking about earlier, the idea of your form, like your ideal self, you in the future, you can do that. And I would say constantly intensify it, constantly attach emotion to it. Another method can be look at it in terms of how it affects your life in different contexts. So let's say your goal is to be healthy. Your goal, going back to this personal trainer example, let's say your goal is to be able to run 6 miles straight. Okay, it's a objectively beneficial goal, but to make it emotionally motivating, ask yourself, in what context is it going to affect the other aspects of your life? If you're going to be able to run 6 miles, how might that affect your relationship with your spouse? If you're single, how might that affect your dating options? If you have kids, how might that affect your relationship with your kids, right? Are you going to be able to live a more active lifestyle and lead by example? Are you going to be able to play more sports with them, right? So once you put these desires and these goals into context on how they affect areas of your life, they become much more emotionally compelling. And the intensity of your desire, as Napoleon Hill is talking about here, that is directly proportionate to the length of your persistence. So we can emotionally visualize these things. We can, it's called daydreaming. Imagine what it might feel like to have accomplished these goals, to already have these things in our present reality. Imagine how it's going to affect the context materials of our lives. So I would say anything you could possibly think of to intensify your desire, intensify and make it more emotionally meaningful. That's a way to develop more persistence. And also in this chapter, I do want to read a few more points before we go into the breakout groups. Napoleon Hill he says 4 simple steps that lead to the habit of persistence. And they are the following. The first is a definite purpose backed by burning desire for its fulfillment. So definite meaning definitive, meaning, as I described earlier, with your ideal, with your form. I don't think it's enough to have these vague general wishes like, I want to be healthy, I want to be rich, I want to have freedom. That's not enough. Everybody has those vague desires, and I would call those wishes, not even desires, because they're not accurately defined. The closer you can articulate them in a numerical format, I would say the better, because it's more definitive that way. If you say, okay, what's healthy to you? Maybe it's a certain body weight. Maybe it's being able to run a certain mileage. Maybe it's, time and duration in exercise. So somehow attach a number to it. I think it becomes much more vivid that way, and it becomes much more clear on which direction you're trying to go to. So that's what he means by definite purpose, backed by burning desire. We already covered that a little bit, trying to make it very emotionally motivating and compelling for you to be able to follow this plan with persistence. The second point to lead to the habit of persistence is a definite plan expressed in continuous action. So I tackle this in my journey from working backwards, from reverse engineering my ideal. So like I explained earlier, my ideal, my Plato's form, my ideal self in the future, the 10 years in the future me projected, I work backwards. I say, okay, what are the major discrepancies between the current me and the future me? And I could say, okay, I need a lot of work in health. I need a lot of work in my social life, etc. And then I try to design disciplines that are going to bridge that gap. So personally, I work backwards, and that's my definite plan. That's how I extract that. And then obviously continuous action. Discipline equals freedom. That's one of my favorite ideas from Jocko Willink. If we only did things when we felt emotionally motivated to do them, nothing would really get done. So I always try to rely on discipline rather than motivation. Motivation and ambition and having the emotion to do something is a good tool to have in your arsenal, but there's biological, there's temperamental, there's other variables that are not always under our immediate control. So in short, what I mean is you can't always rely on motivation in your goals. Okay. So if you're doing that, you're probably only going to feel like doing the thing 1 or 2 times out of the week. And I would argue most change, most growth actually happens when you feel like doing the thing that you need to do the least. I know this personally. I just got into the habit of running. So I've been running multiple miles every single week. And the days that I don't feel like doing it, if I just get up and push myself anyway, we all know this cliche, runner's high when endorphins get released. That's where I experience the most growth. That's where I experience the most satisfaction and pride that I've overcame my weak desires of stagnation and mediocrity by pushing myself into action. And the first step is obviously always the hardest. After that, momentum and gravity kind of assist you during the way. So continuous action, that's very important as well. The third idea from Hill, he says, I think this is arguably the most important out of all 4. He says, a mind closed tightly against all negative and discouraging influences. including negative suggestions of relatives, friends, and acquaintances. So you have to have an objective mind when you're looking at what a negative influence means. And even if somebody has a good intention, they can be a negative influence. That sounds paradoxical. It sounds counterintuitive, but even if they have good intentions, it can be a negative influence. Let me give you an example. If anybody, let's say you, for example, you think of a bold thought, you think of something that you want to do that's going to, get you closer to your form. It's going to bring you fulfillment, satisfaction, happiness, but it's pretty far out of your comfort zone, and rightly so. So let's say you want to quit your job and start your business. You want to sell your house and move to the other coast of the country or something like that, or even move to a different country. And it's always what you wanted to do. And your friend, your close coworker, your family member, etc., they might actually talk you out of this dream. And what they are doing, they might say, oh yes, but think about, your security, think about your job, it's good paying, think about your community, think about your responsibilities, etc., etc. That appears good intentioned on the surface, but I would say deeper down, it's kind of indicative of fear. It's indicative of most often them psychologically projecting their insecurities on you. They see somebody living their dreams. They see somebody going out of their comfort zone and they feel insecure. They feel like they're challenging. They feel like they're being attacked by that, and they try to pull you back down. I've certainly noticed this throughout the course of my life. I've been grateful enough to spend a majority of my life in solitude. So I always valued that inherent structure of my goals over like these superficial connections anyway. I'm not saying I don't like have people that assist me toward my goals, but I was always okay with like stating a goal if somebody had opposition of like, hey, think about safety, think about security, and they're trying to talk me out of it. I gladly just like limited my connection and exposure to that person. So I think that's extremely important. A mind closed tightly against all negative and discouraging influences. So the fourth point is kind of the polarization of that. The fourth point is a friendly alliance with one or more persons who will encourage one to follow through with their plan and their purpose. So that's the exact opposite. It is somebody who encourages you outside of your comfort zone. It is somebody who pushes you in your times of distress. It is somebody who says, okay, yes, you're going through hell right now, but look at the other side. Look at what you're going for. Okay, you've already sacrificed all of this. Why would you quit now and you would lose all of that progress? All of that investment will become worthless. It would become nullified. It would become jettisoned. It would become dispensed with. All of that sacrifice would be meaningless if you quit now. So a good friend, a good influence, a good friendly alliance is somebody who says, okay, keep pushing. Your goal is here. Your goal is right at the other side of this. And I would also personally add in my life, something that I imbue into my routine for persistence is a consistent tracker. So I have a sort of system where I track my daily goals. I track my daily disciplines. I write down my weekly review sheets. I keep great quantified detail on my entire life, of every single day of my life, for accountability, but also so I can see like quantifiably changing growth in my life. I think that is the most fulfilling experience that we can come across in our life, is noting that we have a goal and we are realizing ourselves getting closer to that goal with every single day, with every single decision. I keep persistent in that alone. I have an unbroken streak of 2,000 days of like journals and schedules that I've written in, and that has greatly increased my propensity and proclivity for persistence. So that's something that I would personally add, is have some sort of a system or journal or tracker or planner or something like that, where you write down your thoughts, you write down whatever is important to you, you write down any insights you might have from the day, you write down something that you messed up on, you write down, going back to the argument and the proposition I brought up earlier, you write down anytime you have a failure. I actually have a separate notebook for this called my alchemy journal. Anytime I have a failure, anytime I mess up something, I stop and I say, okay, I don't even say it's a loss. I say, this is a win. I literally tell myself, this is a win. Figure out how. Like, this is a blessing. Figure out how. And like, that's why I call it alchemy, because it's traditionally, people might say it's a loss. It's negative. You took an L there, but I say, okay, what's the equivalent advantage here? What's the door that opened from this door closing here? That's another part of the system that I also implement into my routine. And it's greatly increased my persistence towards my goals. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Shrikant for now. We are going to moderate questions for Q&A.
Excellent. Thanks, John, as usual. Amazing presentation. So we got questions now. We have 4 rules. Type exclamation mark to talk. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, be courteous. It's going to be Joe and Ryan next. Give me just a second. Let me, Joe, go ahead.
Thanks, John, Shrikant. John, fantastic presentation. Appreciate it very much. Is this a story where, you know, sometimes people focus on the goal and disregard the journey itself, and that in order for it to drive persistence is that you appreciate the journey? So is this really just a story about that the journey itself is more important than the destination?
I do get a similar extraction from that. That's why I included the second question on what do you guys believe the meaning, what do you think the meaning of the ending of the story is? I personally do believe it is so. It's like the value of a goal is not the object, the material, the tangible possession that we get from it. It's the person you become in the process. Because as I said earlier, once you set the goal, once you tether yourself to that reality, you're going to come across failure regardless. You're going to come across, you know, defeat. You're going to come across your inner weak self that wants you to quit multiple times. And then once you surmount all of that, it's not even about the object of the goal anymore. Okay, whether it was your health or money or career or finances, whatever it was, you've developed your character. Okay, you have tangible and intangible attributes from that journey, and not to mention, not only from that journey, these are now transferable skills that you can use to any other journey as well. So you've increased your character in the process. So it's not like you're this base foundation of a person and you're just pulling something in. You're pulling something in. It's not like that. Those things are out there. Your goals are out there. You have to climb. You're mapping you're exploring the map of reality. You're on a ladder. You're on a rope. You're up a mountain to get to that goal. But just as a physical hike on a mountain, it's not about the view. You know, it's about the actual process. You know, it is an exercise. It is, you know, it's a physical exercise as well as a mental exercise. You have to come across your you know, ramifications of your past choices. You have to come across that voice that says, oh, slow down, stop. Maybe I should go back. Oh, it looks a little bit cloudy. It might start raining. I should go home. You know what I mean? You have to battle those voices as well. And then once you do that, once you realize the capacity that you have over yourself, then I think that's much more worthwhile than the goal itself. But you need the goal to bring that side of yourself forth. You know what I mean? Like that's the purpose of the goal. It's like tether that, and like the journey is. So I do agree with you. It is more about the journey. Yeah.
Thanks, John. Next up is Ryan, followed by Aaron. Ryan, go ahead.
Hi, John. I had a quick question about how you track your goals and your journaling, and how often do you review that? Like, do you go back through a week, or is it like at the end of a day? So I'm kind of wondering what your review of your journaling is, and what tracker do you use, or what kind of physical tools do you use to help you with that process?
Okay, cool. I've made my own schedule since 2013. I've used the same one. I have a bunch of different revisions since then, of course, but I've always used my own documents. Like I just typed up my own kind of system, organized it, and it's been very effective now. I've used the same like prototype right now for the past 4 or 5 years. I have a daily planner, so I write down like my traditional daily planner, like to-do list, like my disciplines. I cross off my disciplines, and then I review that day. So I review things like intangibles, like what did I learn today? What's something that I could have improved today? What did I think about the majority of the day? What was my focus? Like what did I do every hour of the day, etc. And then I have a weekly review sheet where I ask myself more like broad questions. Like what was my highest high of the week? What did I extract out of the week? What did I accomplish this week? What did I neglect this week, etc. I have that every single week. And then once I have 52 weeks completed, I have 52 packets. I then do a comprehensive analysis every single New Year's where I look over my entire year and I say, okay, what are the beliefs that are actualizing and manifesting themselves through these actions? Like what are some patterns that I can notice week after week, even though in the moment I'm too focused on my day to really realize where my mind's at. But like if you look at a whole year of your data, it's profoundly illuminating and enlightening. And then once I have that, I redo I was talking about earlier, the exercise of finding your form, your ideal. Every year, I also, after that completion of the belief analysis, I also redo what I call a foundation PDF I've designed, where I design my ideal again every year based off of my experiences, based off of my value structure, based off of what I want in the current moment. And I redo that every year.
Next up is Aaron, followed by Nari. Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, John, once again, fantastic presentation. I really like what you said about the solitude part, because I think people don't realize how hard they're going to get hit with people when they try and do something new, especially if it's something related to their work or their business. Like, you will get made fun of, you will get ridiculed, and you have to really prepare for that. And you have to be able to explain to the people around you why you're no longer free to hang out on Fridays or Saturdays, and basically take that humiliation. And I think that's a skill in itself, being able to take ridicule and humiliation and still persevere.
Absolutely. I mean, I look at this the following way. I have a metaphor. I don't know if it's actually that relevant, but I try to hang out, like, we shouldn't hang out with people just because we share a past. We should hang out with people that we might share a future with. So we shouldn't be like, we shouldn't reject our goals based off of blind loyalty to people that we've hung out with in the past. Because it's familiar, because it's expedient, because it's comfortable, because they're going to echo our views, because they're not going to challenge us in any way, because they're not going to hold us accountable on the goals that we set, because they're going to discourage us from getting out of our comfort zone, because that makes them uncomfortable. So absolutely. I've found that to be an advantage in my life. I always kind of stuck to myself. I never really had like a big social circle. I never really looked outside for validation. I never really kind of shared my ideas and goals and aims with other people. So once I started doing that, like, publicly, and I met with ridicule and like opposition and criticism or discouragement, I think I had an easier time like dispensing that and like not valuing it and saying, okay, I know you're projecting on me. I know this, I know that, whatever. That's totally fine. You're just expressing your beliefs. I'm only the canvas. You know, it's not even about me. It's just about you at this point. So I do agree. It is difficult, though. It is difficult for a lot of people. And that is something that I think it's a necessary step a lot of people have to get over.
Okay. Next up is Nari, Hao, Mark, Francis, and Maxine. Nari, go ahead.
Hey, so here, just to kind of build off of that and play devil's advocate, any sort of characteristic taken to extreme could be negative. So how do we avoid, in being persistent, becoming too headstrong that we don't take back take in necessary feedback? So, you know, how do you reconcile like the Ray Dalio's principles, right, of that feedback loop and constantly progressing upward through feedback, with just having strength and faith in your own path?
Yeah, so a few things. Well, one, that is actually the nature of the third question. Like, how are we to ensure we're not persistent toward like a dead end, right? The second point, I think I briefly covered it in the presentation. I think it's like, personally, I would look at if I got multiple indicators of the same instance or the same pattern. If I see patterns arise of like resistance, or I see an indicator that I'm not able, and I've actually really, really tried my best to surmount whatever goals in front of me, and I keep getting indicators that I don't want it, it's not worth my investment, or I might be better if I pivoted. If I got multiple of the same indicators, then maybe I would consider. But an anomalous indicator, no. Like, anything that happened one time, no. That's just it's a necessary obstacle. And I would also play devil's advocate to your devil's advocate, and I would say more fortunes have been lost, more marriages ruined, more people's lives destroyed, more health goals never attained because of lack of persistence than too much persistence. Okay, find somebody who's failed because of too much persistence. That's probably 1 in 10,000. Okay, based off of the statistics for people who have failed from lack of persistence. So that's what I would say.
Okay, next up is Mark. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you sort of answered my question, but maybe if there's anything more you wanted to add to this idea of, am I being stubborn, or am I demonstrating perseverance? Because I think we can get attached to the idea that this is the way through the obstacle, but is it really, or are we really just banging our heads against a wall?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I think it's temperamental in a lot of people. Like some people might just be more. I don't want to really use persistence as like a placeholder for stubborn, but some people kind of have a higher proclivity to just like stay what do people say? One track mind. Like that's a saying people say. One track mind. Like you're thinking about one thing, you're doing one thing until it's completed. Task A is completed, okay, and then I'll even look at task B. But maybe if you look at task B first and you looked at task C as an overview, you could have done task A better first. You know what I mean? So there are a lot of variables in that. And I think, my personal answer as of right now is looking at that dichotomy between being stubborn and hard-headed and persistence as if you see multiple like mistakes that are of a pattern, like they're the same mistake, then I think you're just being stubborn. But if it's like one mistake, you learn from it, you make a different mistake, you learn from that too, you make a different mistake, you learn from that, and you still want the object of your definite aim and goal at that point, by all means, I think that's persistence. I would encourage pushing forward.
Next up is Francis. Francis, go ahead.
Yeah, I read the book like about 8 years ago. It was a very good book. I wanted to know what parallels does this book have to Moby Dick? Because I find a lot of parallels in Moby Dick, like the captain is trying to kill the whale, and then this protagonist in the Old Man in the Sea was trying to kill that animal. So what parallels do they have the same, and also what do they have different?
Mm-hmm. So personally, I would not actually be able to answer that. I have not read Moby Dick, unfortunately. But it might be a good discussion in the future.
Okay. Next up is Maxine.
I happen to love this subject. I love the book. And I read it many times. And I believe in perseverance. I believe if you plow through, you get there. Mm-hmm. And you should never stop plowing through. But in answer to the question that what someone just had, there will be people along the way that will absolutely be trying to pull you down, to stand in your way, to have you not follow your dreams. So the best way to deal with them, you can't argue with them. They're not going to listen. Doesn't matter. You're still going to have perseverance without them. So don't discuss it with them. They don't have to know what you're doing. You just eliminate it. Talk about something else. Do not discuss it with them. I have had so many trials and tribulations in this subject and plowed right through. Mm-hmm. And then in the end, the people came around and said, oh, that was a wonderful idea. Mm-hmm. But if I had discussed it with them, never. It would have never, and I would have just been upset and it would have been a hindrance to my goal. Don't tell everybody what you're going to do. Just go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you.
Wow, Maxine, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Next up is Jonathan.
Hey, John. So you said you quoted Napoleon Hill, and I don't know what the exact quote was, but it was something like persistence in pursuit of a goal follows from the intensity of desire, or something between both of those. I was wondering if you have any thoughts, and you just riff on reversing that formulation, or thoughts on the manufacturing of desire by being persistent.
The manufacturing of desire?
Yeah.
So like the intensification through persistence in itself?
Right. So let's say you think something is good for you, but it doesn't necessarily resonate with you. So you set some goal and you're like, I should do that because X, Y, and Z. So you have some logical reason. And then you pursue it with persistence. Do you think you can kind of reverse that formulation from Napoleon Hill, which means your desire will increase? Like if you have someone coming to train with you at gym, and they're like, I want this and this for this reason, but it doesn't necessarily like fill them up with joy. Do you think they can be filled up with joy by pursuing that goal persistently? By like forcing it?
I see. Very good question. Yeah, so it's kind of tricky because Hill is arguing like you won't have. I don't know if he's going that far, but maybe we can imply it. You won't have persistence unless your goal is emotionally like desirable, unless you have a burning desire for its fulfillment, as he says. So even though I would still say yes, my short answer. Because even if you look at it logically, so you say, okay, I want to be in shape, not for logical reasons or not for emotional reasons, but because maybe I just want to live 10 years longer, or whatever it happens to be, like a shape. Or maybe, just for the sake of progression. I'm at 10% body fat, I want to be 8%. My quality of life is not going to differ for 2%, right, at all. So it's not emotionally motivating, but it might be intellectually motivating. Now, I would still argue that persistence might still be, or the desire might be cultivated from that persistence in terms of what I brought up earlier, the deeply fulfilling emotional state of growth, of improvement, of comparing ourselves to who we were yesterday and realizing, okay, I'm stronger than the person who woke up and stood up out of this bed today. I am better than who I was than when I went to bed last night. That is one of the most gratifying feelings we can possibly experience. And I think that in itself, if you tied that to the goal, if you had that goal of 10% to 8% or something, you're realizing you're progressing every single day. I do think you would also you would attach your emotion to that goal. Like I was talking to about Joe earlier, you're tethered to that goal, and that's like the placeholder, but then you also tether your emotion to that placeholder. You know what I mean? You attach it along with it, even though it started intellectually. I think it would end up you would get emotionally involved in it based off of familiarity.
Excellent. So let's do the breakout rooms now. We're going to do breakout rooms for 25 minutes. And in 25 minutes, we'll all be back here automatically to discuss our takeaways. Everybody gets to talk for 2 through 3 minutes about what they got from these discussions. All right, I'm starting the breakout rooms now.